Hi, I'm Desiree.
And I'm Patrick. You're watching Adventure Moto Southwest, and today we're talking about Royal Enfield, our experiences, what we love, what we don't, and some of the problems we've had with these bikes.
Between us, we've owned 3 different Royal Enfields. We've had a Himalayan, a Classic 350, and a Continental GT. So we have a lot to say.
And yes, we've had issues with all of them. So stick around because we'll get into that and what the warranty process was like as well. So let's start with what we like about Royal Enfield. What do you like about Royal Enfield?
I think the thing that drew me in first and keeps me interested is the look.
I would agree. Yeah, definitely the look. I'd actually say that's probably the number one thing, and specifically the paint schemes they have. I think they do paint better than any other company, and I'm not talking about the quality of the finish. I don't know. I can't speak to that necessarily. I haven't had any issues with bikes we've owned. But just the way, the color choices and then the color combos.
Definitely.
Which is pretty unique. Another thing is the value. So you get a lot of bike for the price. And with the value products, I think that you also, run that risk of whether or not you're getting something that is of reasonable quality.
Something that I do really like about them, though, is that low seat height on a lot of their bikes. And as a female rider, shorter rider, it definitely gives me way more option. In that Classic 350, I think that was the most comfortable bike I had. And I felt like I had a lot of control with it. I could control it easily. I sat on it nicely. I just really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Especially, any of the 350s. We've sat on a few now at this point, in addition to the one we owned. And lower seat height for sure. And even I think the seat is a little taller on the Continental GT and the Interceptors, but even that pretty moderate height overall. Definitely pretty approachable. Also, the overall weight distribution of the bike, they hold their weight lower. How did that feel for you from the shorter person perspective?
I think it's the easiest bike I've had to control overall. I take things slowly, I'm a very conservative rider. But even with that, I just felt like I had more control. I could do more lean, just 1 foot stopping, which was very new to me at the time. I was very comfortable on the Classic, so.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I feel like they have either really good ergonomics or decent. But I've never run into any of their bikes where I just hated their ergonomics. And so what I'm thinking about when I say that is, for me personally, I'm not a fan of clip-ons anymore. I've had my share of bikes in the past that had real low, clip-on actual sport bikes. The Continental GT sort of has clip-ons, but they have a rise to them. And to me, I would put that at the worst end of the spectrum in terms of ergonomics. That would be the absolute worst. And that wasn't that bad because they had that rise to them. That being said, I'm not considering, purchasing another one of those bikes at this point just because it is too low for me. But But then on the other hand, I think about the Himalayan. And for whatever reason, to me, the Himalayan, and I'm talking about the original one, the 411cc, not the new 450 that's out. When I had that one, I felt that was the perfect, most comfortable setup you can get stock. That's just my preference, but for some reason that seat I found very comfortable for long rides. And then the handlebar height was perfect. The standing position was great. I really liked it. So what did you think about the Classic 350?
I'd agree. It was one of the more comfortable bikes I've had, especially just the way it goes. I liked that it felt natural where my feet go on the pegs, and it was just very natural feeling, I'd say.
Yeah. The only weird thing that I did notice, not on the Classic, you mentioned the pegs, but on the Continental GT, I remember the foot pegs and the brakes being pretty close in. It was really, really close into the bike. And it was the brake, I remember feeling it was this tiny little nub. Like it needed to be extended a little bit, the lever. And so I remember I always I felt like I had to go digging for it a little tiny bit. I could be remembering that wrong, but I seem to remember that was the thing with that. It's been about 2 years since I've had that bike now. So
now there are a lot of things that we did, like, you know, with the riding positions, and we said that naturally comes with the bike. But a nice thing that I know I've heard you mention is a lot about some of the things that you can change about the bikes as well.
Yep. So something that I'm interested in doing is swapping tanks between the Continental GT and the Interceptor. And the parts, from what I understand, I've watched a lot of videos and read some forums, that the parts are interchangeable. So I really like that. There seems to be a really high amount of aftermarket parts available in general for these bikes. So they are good platforms to start at if you do want to modify and go from there. So I think that's another pro of Royal Enfield in general. So now let's talk about some of the downsides of Royal Enfield bikes that we've owned and just in general. So what do you think about reliability?
Well, currently we've owned 3 Royal Enfields, and we've had issues, I'd say major issues, with all 3 of them.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't trust one anymore to take on a BDR or a forest trail or anything like that. I've tried that. And so a little bit later in the video, we're going to get into the specific issues we've had with our bikes, both warranty and non-warranty. So stick around for that. But yeah, I would not trust it for anything remote travel.
But what do you think about build quality?
Well, I'm a little torn on this one too, because, you know, they're not up to certain specs like you would expect from like Honda or, you know, things like that. But the thing that is kind of concerning to me is that, I don't know, when did we buy the first Royal Enfield? Was that around 2020 maybe?
That sounds about right. 2019 or 2020.
So, you know, that was the Himalayan, and it had issues, and working with the dealership and all that, we've always heard over the last 5 years now, something to the extent of, oh, they've really improved it in the last few years. And yeah, that's the problem. That was the first of 3 bikes that we bought. And it continues to be the same issue.
Yeah, a similar thing happened with the Classic.
Mm-hmm.
We got it, and there was a slight issue.
Both issues from the factory, and then things that happened later. So I'm not convinced that, I mean, I think if we're comparing them to the bikes that they were building in the early 2000s, then I would say definitely build quality's gone up for sure. But I'm not convinced that, you know, it's kind of what we, you know, comparing to the Japanese bikes especially, I don't think it's there yet.
So we did have a couple of those factory issues with those bikes, but they did have a nice warranty.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing with their warranty that, you know, it's kind of debatable whether or not it's good, is that on paper it looks really good. Now, definitely fact check me if this is not what they're doing currently in 2025, but they've always had some sort of like 3-year warranty that included roadside assistance. But the trouble with that is that if you have a warranty issue, at least in our experience with our Royal Enfield dealer, parts can be almost, they'll, you know, they say, oh yeah, they have parts, but then they don't show up, and months go by. And so we can't get the issues fixed.
I never saw one of the parts.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things that goes along with that. Now, we never had to test the roadside assistance part.
Thankfully, no.
So, yeah, so we don't know about that. But now, you know, getting into that whole thing, let's talk about that one specific instance. So what happened with the Classic 350, and what was the timeline like with that warranty, and specifically the speedometer?
Yeah, so had the Classic 350, it was working great. It was probably about a month in, I'd say.
Yeah.
The speedometer got stuck at 60 miles per hour. And it was stuck that way for about 3 days. Had tried to tap it, turn it on, turn it off, you know, tried to change speeds. And then it finally went down to 0.
And
then it was stuck
there.
on 0.
Yeah.
And then I'd say from then on out, it was hit or miss as to whether it would work or not. And the only reason we know that is because when we had to contact our dealer and get warranty, they said that they would send the new part for that. And we had it a year and never saw the part.
Just under.
Yeah. And we'd call and say, oh, it says it's on a train. It says it's on a ship. But then it never made it to us. I don't think it ever hit U.S. side. But I will give the caveats that was probably peak COVID time.
It was after.
Oh, yeah, it was.
It was still like there was lingering talk of it and all that, but it wasn't full on COVID restrictions.
Yeah, things were, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But we ended up selling the bike.
Yeah, that is something, to think about. And, again, in 2025, things may be better. But that goes back to that whole, thing we kept being told by the dealership is they really improved it. And, it's just, when is that really going to happen? So, anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention was the semi-frequent maintenance. It's not terrible. But, again, when you're comparing to a Honda or anything that's really just liquid-cooled, not the XT. So something like that, the maintenance intervals are much more spread apart. Like on the South Africa Twin or the Rally, the valve checks, I think they're anywhere from 12 to 16,000 miles, something really big like that, which is nice. And then on the Royal Enfields, it's, and the Yamaha XT250, because it's air cooled, they have the shorter maintenance checks on the valves. Now, I've never personally done the valves myself, but I've heard from a friend who does his that it's relatively easy to get in there. But still, nonetheless, it does take some time and all that. So, and I think it's every 4,000 miles or something like that. So, there's something to consider with these bikes. They're air and oil cooled engines, but that's also part of what makes them kind of cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, it comes with it too.
So now let's get into the specific problems we've had with each of the bikes.
All right. I guess I'll start with the Himalayan.
Yeah.
That was the first one we bought. And again, this was the last generation of the Himalayans, the 411cc engine. Now, there's the whole thing with that older model that they are cold-blooded. They all use that phrase that, they even have a choke on them, even though they're fuel injected. And so they don't always reliably start up on the first crank. My bike was very much part of that as well, but it usually was, crank number 2 or 3. So not the end of the world. So that part was fine. But what did start doing eventually though, is it did start not starting, just totally. And it was a very specific ride. I remember it just wouldn't start at that point. It was not battery related issue. Cause when I got it back, I tested the battery levels and all that. It was totally fine. So it wasn't related to that. It wouldn't start, and it wouldn't. But then sometimes it would. It would be every 3 or 4 attempts, it would nothing. But then, after that, it would start up once. So what happened was I was out in the Santa Fe National Forest with a friend of mine, and that's we weren't too far off the beaten path, but we were definitely in some forest roads, and that's when it really started acting up. And I was like, to heck with this. And so we ended up having to push start it. And once we got it running, thank God we did, I just was riding and I was on my Cardo talking to him, and I just said, hey, I'm going to keep going. I don't want to shut this thing off. I'm just going to go straight back home. You can keep riding if you want, but that's what I got to do. So that was when that started happening. And then it kept happening. And I did a lot of short, closer to home rides with that. Because I don't want to test it, way out in the middle of nowhere. So that's part of the reason why I don't trust Royal Enfield bikes when you're way out in a forest road. But there's more. So do you want to tell them about how the Classic arrived to us?
We got the Classic and we took it home, and then it was probably about that second day. Well, no, we went on a ride together. So it was that first weekend, and you were riding behind me. Mm-hmm. And it looked crooked, but then, of course, we were riding, so we weren't sure.
Fender, the rear fender.
Oh, yes. Weren't sure, we're doing curves or doing turns. Is that really? We put it level. Nope, rear fender arrived crooked from the factory.
And part of that's on us because, when you're inspecting a new bike and all that, you should look over the whole thing. But then on the other hand of that, I'm not used to having bikes that have a rear fender that's offset. And it was offset. That if you're looking at the back of the bike, and you see the rear fender and the tire coming out of the middle, it was offset by a good inch.
Yeah. And if we were going to take any extreme curves, it was like about 1.5 inches off where it could have hit. So we had to have that fixed right away.
Yeah.
And we already told you about the speedometer issue with the Classic as well.
Now, obviously, the fender was a warranty thing, but because there was no parts needed, they were able to do that right away.
Yes.
Our local Royal Enfield dealer could handle that right away. Of course, we already mentioned the timeline with the speedometer. So, that was that. Continental GT had some issues.
It did.
So I bought the Continental GT used. I was only the second owner, though, and it did have just about 800 to 1,000 miles. Very, very low mileage. And it was great for about 8 months or so. But again, like the Himalayan, very specifically on one ride, I was just here in town, luckily, and I was riding, come to a stop, and pulling the clutch like normal, and it just died. And then here's the weird thing. I turn it back on, restart it, fired right back up, died again. And then I started it again, and then it fired right back up. And I keep the revs up a little bit, totally fine, it's working, driving for a bit. The minute, though, I let go of that throttle, it just would not idle. It just totally died. So in hindsight, and this is where we need your guys' help, to give us some feedback on what you think was going on. My theory, I've been reading more about these problems with Royal Enfield over the years, more and more, and I hear that the relays are usually the culprits for potentially both of the starting issues with the Continental and the Royal Enfield. Apparently, the Himalayan, sorry, and the Continental GT. Apparently what they do is, from the factory, for whatever reason, they use either the wrong type of grease or too much grease inside the relays. So there's a fix you can do where you pull out the electrical relays and you could just kind of, get in there with a Q-tip or something just to get the extra grease out. And then you can replace it with this other appropriate type of grease that is more, conductive or something. But so that kind of describes what might have been both of those problems. But I'm not a mechanic at all. So
neither am I.
So if you guys have any ideas on what that could have been. But yeah, to summarize it, each bike had one significant issue, and then the Classic had two.
Yeah.
So.
But you did say that you were looking at switching tanks. So
yes.
I would say after the Continental GT died, I was like, this is another major issue. I swore off Royal Enfield.
I did too.
I was like, never again. Mm-hmm. However, the things that reeled me in at first, the look, the good deal, they keep me interested.
Yeah, me too. So now let's talk about who should buy a Royal Enfield. So who are these bikes for?
For me, it was great. As a female rider, love it. And, I would consider getting another one again. However, given these big issues, the short intervals of time, and even the thing you just described that I had no idea, these bikes are for someone willing to put in a little bit of work. If that's something that doesn't bother you, I think it's great. They are great bikes, fun bikes.
Yep. And you got to love retro styling too, round headlights and whatnot, which to me was an acquired taste. I remember in my younger years, I was just a typical street Rossi squid, and all I wanted was angular bug bikes, and I wanted the headlights to be just, lines basically. And I have come full circle on that. I very much appreciate that now in my 30s.
Finally.
So, yeah, she's always liked.
I've always liked
retro
those.
style. And, so yeah, you have to appreciate that for sure. So if you don't, I'm still not sold on them for long distance adventure riding. And, I had a glimpse of hope earlier this year. The new Himalayan came out, the 450 edition, and it's been totally redone. And I was thinking maybe this is the time. They've really improved their build quality recently, So maybe this was the one. But then I was watching Yami Noob's video of that where they flew him out to India to try the new 450 Himalayan. Keep in mind that was a press bike. It was a pre-production model from what I understand, so that could be a thing. But that bike literally started dying on him while he was doing the press release rides. So that, I mean, I was like, oh, damn it, it's happening again. So, I mean, yeah, that's just one instance, of course, but I don't know. So yeah, I don't think they're for people who need ultra rock solid reliability.
No, but if you're doing short rides around town, commuter, yeah.
Yeah. But I still personally would not recommend it for backcountry discovery routes, forest trails, exploring and things like that. And, you know, on the new 450 models, time will tell on that. But yeah, if you can tinker a little bit and you're okay with a few quirks, then they're great bikes otherwise. So, would you buy another Royal Enfield?
You know, despite the issues we had and having sworn off them before, I would. I would.
Which one would you get from the full lineup?
I would go back to the classic 350, I think. I would go, same style. I loved it. And I would probably do the same paint scheme I had, too. That I really liked that army look. It was matte. So unique. Would you buy Royal Enfield?
I unfortunately would. I just, you know, part of that whole aesthetic and the old school engine design, given the issues it has, that's really kind of what gives it its character to me. So yeah, I would.
Which one would you get?
Well, I do think the blue Continental GT that we owned was probably the most beautiful bike, in my opinion, that I've ever owned.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. But despite the clip-on handlebars having a little bit of rise to them, I just don't think I could ever do that again in terms of ergonomics. So the next closest thing would be the INT, the Interceptor 650. So I would go that route for sure. And what I would do is I would just get any color that's a good deal, and I would put the one I had the S&S pipes on it, and they said it's so good. I'm not a big aftermarket exhaust guy. I usually roll with the OEM, the stock exhaust, and I know that's sacrilege in this community, but you know, I don't like loud bikes. And like that Harley over there has the Vance and Hines 3-inch slash pipes on it, and they were put on by the previous owner, and it's honestly it's annoying. But those S&S pipes on the Continental GT were perfect. They weren't too loud, they weren't too soft. They had some pops and burbles on the decel and all that. They sounded really good. So I would do that, and then I would also I would buy a tank, a blue Continental GT tank, and put it on the INT, the Interceptor. I've seen a couple videos now and read some forums about that. It's possible. You only lose about a liter of capacity of gas capacity with the Continental GT tank, and they are supposedly interchangeable. So that's what I would do.
Well, I know we'd both get Royal Enfield again, despite the issues, but that does make me curious. Have you had a Royal Enfield? What issues have you had, if any? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting comment section on this one.
Yeah.
But if you found this video helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. We've got a lot more motorcycle content coming your way soon, so thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.